Hey YouTube, we have kind of an interesting video today. We have a soundboard that came out of a Joust 2 arcade game that I picked up from an operator that had no other, they didn't have the main PCB or whatever PCBs go with that game. So I grabbed it just as a spare because by looking at it, I noticed that it looked very similar to a System 11 Pin Bot Pinball soundboard. So this board came out of a pin bot. I'm going to try and figure out if the Joust 2 board can be reconfigured to work in a pin bot. Now this soundboard isn't the same as earlier System 11. There was a special soundboard that High Speed and Grand Lizard used. And then there might have been another intermediate one here, but this is the 11298 board. It's the same number there, but this is a different, the last four is a different revision for Joust, and then if we could see that, there's a different revision here too, according to PinWiki. And for a pin bot, this was rebuilt, and this is a fully working board, but there's only one ROM in here, and there's two open spots. On the Joust board, I've already taken the ROMs out, but they were fully populated. And this board from Pinbot was, from my experience, I know it was also used in a Millionaire pinball machine, and they had this ROM populated, but there were no other components more than what they had here. So I think the level of population, where you notice a lot of this is empty up here, is enough to run this ROM and this ROM if you needed it for Millionaire, and then you only need this ROM for Pinbot. This is also the factory ROM. It's not been a combined ROM into a larger ROM chip or anything. This is the factory one. Now comparing that over to this one, again, we kind of notice that we have a lot of the same setup, but it's that top corner that's different. So kind of everything from this capacitor and then these resistors and jumper and capacitor are missing. But on this board, there's a chip here. By some previous tech, it was flagged bad, so I'll probably have to scrape that off and figure out what it is. But I'm guessing that everything that's up here is to probably enable the contents of this to be played as sounds. So I might have to see if there's any bad components up here, and then worst case scenario, I can just snip a leg off of all of these and then take them out of circuit and then see if it functions as a Pinbot soundboard. So my first step, I'll have to do this in a couple different videos, but would be to take this ROM out, copy it, and then burn it onto a new ROM for this board. I don't want to mess this original one up just in case there's something really wrong with this board. And then figure out if it'll actually play sound and work in a Pinbot. Now the other thing that this board was kind of incomplete, so what I used was another arcade soundboard. I need to still grab the crystals missing, that tall silver crystal. I'll have to swap one of those over for testing. But I have a parts board. And then I also had to grab one of the Yamaha chips, one of the synth chips. So here's one of the smaller Yamaha 3012 and then the 2151 that were used in later System 11 pinball soundboards as well. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of part swapping just so I can see if this one will go. Now this soundboard was supposedly used, again I haven't seen it, but supposedly used, I should be looking at this one, up until partway through the F14 Tomcat run. And then that's when they switched to the 11, I think the numbers are 11581, that looks a lot like this board, but it's not quite this board. This is out of a High Impact. So this is another Williams video game board that can be used in a pinball machine. So from F14 on, I think all System 11 games use this board. And then as the System 11 progressed from A to B to C, more and more duties were assigned to this board versus being on the MPU. Because if you're familiar with the MPUs, that top left corner is all the sound section on a pinball MPU. And those were fully populated at the early start of System 11 games, and then as it gradually got older and older, they started phasing that out and moving all those sound duties to the actual soundboard. So this is out of a High Impact, and this will run, supposedly, I've heard success stories, as long as you change these ROMs, and these for High Impact are physically larger chips, and also they have more memory. So if you're going to run a pinball on one of these boards, you need to double your ROM images and then put them on this size of chip. So you have to do a little bit of file modification, but I've heard that once you double your images and burn them to a larger chip, it's plug and play. Because again, it's kind of the same setup. I already robbed the 6809 processor for this board. I know it's working with this board, but you got a PIA, you got a RAM, you got your same synth chips from these other two boards, and then just some more ROMs. So it's very, very similar to these boards, and hopefully between these I can get this one going, and then might be another source if you're hard up for a Pin Bot or a Millionaire soundboard or even a Tomcat soundboard, if you can find one of these Joust ones. And again, you kind of see a lot of guys that they know a lot about just pinball boards, or they might know a lot just about arcade boards, but it's kind of cool when you can realize that these obviously were made by the same manufacturer and then the same company, Williams, and then you can kind of figure out if there's any way to transfer parts and substitute parts, because one might be easier to find and cheaper than the other ones. The other part that might make this project a little bit challenging is this came out of a Pin Bot. It's an 11298 board, but then in the Pin Bot manual, it's wrong. It says 11297. So this is a previous board that the Williams engineers never updated in their files, and they have that problem a lot with these schematics. You have to be really careful. A lot of times it's a literal copy and paste error where they never updated what they were using, and they just reused the same sheets from the last game. So I'm not even sure what game used that. You can probably look it up on PinWiki, but it's a little bit different. It's kind of funny because on their schematic in here, they don't even have the connector for the speakers. So that must have been when the speakers were coming off of the MPU still in earlier System 11 games. So we'll come back and see what I figure out.